Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a nightmare more terrifying than your inbox after a long weekend. Poverty in Victorian England. Forget top hats, carriages, and glittering ballrooms. Tonight, you are dirt poor. Victorian poor. The kind of poor where your dinner has more coal dust than vegetables, and your best friend is an unusually loyal sewer rat. So before you settle in, take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. Leave a comment telling me where you are listening from and what time it is for you. Now, go ahead, dim the lights, get under your hopefully clean sheets, and put on a fan for that soft white noise. But let's pause for a second. What did the poor actually eat, and how many teeth did it cost them? Did families really cram 10 people into a single bed? Was the family pet a dog? Or just a rat too bold to chase away? How many factory shifts could you work before your body simply gave up? Could you survive on cold tea and bread so stale it doubled as a weapon? And what do you do when your only winter coat is literally stolen off a corpse? Congratulations! You've just woken up in 1853 in the East End of London. You have a cough, 3 jobs, and no socks. Good luck. Morning comes early. And by morning I mean any time the screaming baby next door stops long enough for you to hear the church bells. Your bed is a straw-stuffed sack you share with 2 siblings and a suspiciously lumpy pillow. Sunlight slips through cracks in the wall. Just enough to remind you you're still alive, but not enough to see where the fleas are hiding. You try to stretch, but immediately regret it. Your back cracks like an old church pew, and your legs are tangled with what you hope is your brother's foot, not a loose rat. The pillow? It's less soft cloud and more collection of hay, dust, and something vaguely organic that's been there since before you were born. The workhouse dormitory smells like a special blend of damp wool, stale cabbage, and existential dread. Think of it as the original designer fragrance, Eau de Industrial Revolution. As you sit up, your first sensation is the cold. Victorian workhouses weren't heated unless the local charity board accidentally left the coal delivery unlocked, and you can bet that never happened. You shiver so hard your teeth chatter, which at least drowns out the sound of Uncle Harold snoring 2 beds away. The window is just a single pane of foggy glass, cracked in the corner and covered in enough grime to classify as a living organism. Condensation drips down the inside and lands with a wet plop on your only pair of socks, which, let's be honest, weren't dry to begin with. Your siblings are already squabbling about whose turn it is to check the mattress for bed bugs, a thrilling pre-breakfast game everyone loses. You shake out the blanket and get a fresh puff of dust to the face, then wonder if the itching is from the straw, the bugs, or simply your body's protest at still being alive. Next comes the great wardrobe debate. Which layer of clothes do you sleep in, and which do you put on after you wake up? If you're lucky, you slept in your clothes, saves time, and frankly, warmth. If you're unlucky, your shirt spent the night under the bed drying and is now just cold and damp instead of cold and sweaty. You pull it over your head anyway as a rite of passage for surviving another night. On the other side of the thin wood partition, you can hear the matron already marching up and down, rattling her keys like a Dickensian jailer. She shouts something about discipline and order, which mostly means it's time to queue for the morning wash, a metal basin of icy water shared by 20 children and approximately 3 bars of soap per year. You splash your face, instantly awake as the shock travels down your spine. The water is cloudy with yesterday's grime, but at least it's too cold for anything to live in it. Except, possibly, the odd amoeba with a taste for misery. Breakfast isn't served so much as issued, like a government warning. You shuffle in line, holding your tin bowl and spoon like treasured heirlooms. If you're lucky, today's offering is gruel, lumpy, flavourless, and capable of filling you up for a solid 20 minutes. You try to remember if it's oats, barley, or just the leftover sweepings from the flour sacks. Either way, you eat it gratefully. Anything to keep the hunger at bay for another few hours. As you eat, you take in the morning sights and sounds. Coughing fits echoing off the stone walls, a fight breaking out over a crust of bread, and someone discovering a dead mouse in their shoe. There's no such thing as privacy or peace and quiet, just the constant low roar of survival. If you're lucky, you have time to finish your food before work begins. If not, you're expected to shovel it in as you walk, because the workhouse doesn't wait. Today's job could be picking oakum, that's old rope for the uninitiated, scrubbing laundry, or sorting rags for recycling into paper. It's repetitive, exhausting, and sometimes so dull you find yourself drifting into a daydream until someone shouts your name and reminds you that daydreaming is a luxury you definitely can't afford. Still, you keep going, because the thing about waking up in the workhouse is, as grim as it is, you made it through another night. And in Victorian England, sometimes that's all you can ask for. Congratulations. You're awake, you're working, and you're only slightly more miserable than you were yesterday. That's progress. Sort of. Breakfast isn't so much a meal as a negotiation. If you're lucky, it's stale bread dipped in watered-down tea. If you're not, it's just the tea. You sip it carefully, trying to ignore the mysterious floating bits and wonder what people with actual food dream about. You stare at the bread, which is less freshly baked loaf and more dental challenge. The crust is hard enough to serve as a blunt weapon, and the inside is a texture somewhere between mattress stuffing and packing material. You glance across the room and see your little sister gnawing determinedly, jaw working like a Victorian beaver, crumbs gathering in a small pile on the front of her dress, her only dress, naturally. There's a certain artistry in eating bread that's seen better decades. You learn to soak it in tea just long enough that it becomes almost chewable, but not so long that it dissolves and disappears altogether. That's called losing your breakfast, and nobody can afford that. The tea is, technically, a hot beverage. In reality, it's more of a beige suggestion, brewed from leaves that have been reused so often they're eligible for a pension. Your mother insists that letting the leaves steep overnight makes it stronger, but you suspect it just gives them more time to contemplate their life choices. Sometimes you find a surprise in your mug, a floating speck of something. It might be a tea leaf. It might be coal dust. It might be a long-lost relative. You sip bravely, because in the world of the Victorian poor, you don't ask questions you're not ready to answer. Sometimes, if someone in the family managed a lucky break, a coin found in the gutter, a day's work at the factory, or a kindly neighbour with a soft spot for orphans, there's something extra on the table. Maybe a knob of margarine, scraped carefully across the bread so thinly it's basically theoretical. Or a sliver of cheese so old it's probably seen more birthdays than you have. You cut it into tiny pieces and savour it like it's gold. On a good day, there's dripping, the cooled fat from yesterday's roast, except, of course, there was no roast, so you settle for the memory of meat. Some families resort to creative substitutions. Potatoes for breakfast? If you have them, sure. Boiled, mashed, or just sort of present, as a lumpy presence on the plate. If not, maybe porridge, made with water and oats that have travelled suspiciously far from Scotland. The porridge is sticky and grey, and it clings to your spoon and your soul with a determination rarely seen in food. You eat it anyway, because hunger has no pride. If you're really unlucky, breakfast is just hope and yesterday's smell. You might hear a neighbour talk about tea and toast as if it's a treat, but that's because nobody remembers what real breakfast tastes like. Eggs? A legend. Jam? A rumour. Bacon? A fairy tale passed down to scare children into behaving. On Sundays, if you're blessed, someone might bring home a scrap of kipper or a dab of jam. You spread it so thin it barely covers the bread. Then stare at it with the reverence usually reserved for royal weddings. And always, there's the sound of the city outside, the clatter of carts, the calls of street vendors, the endless coughs echoing down the hall. You eat quickly, because time is precious, and so is your place at the table. Siblings elbow for the best crumbs. Someone drops their bread, And there's a fierce debate about the 5-second rule, which in the Victorian slum is really more of a 5-minute guideline, provided the rats don't get there first. You finish your meal, such as it is, with the kind of satisfaction only possible when you know there won't be seconds. You scrape the last bit of bread out of your mug, chew thoughtfully, and try to ignore the gnawing in your belly that starts up almost immediately. But you made it through another breakfast. You didn't starve. You get up from the table, ready to face the day, knowing lunch is just around the corner, and it's probably even less impressive than breakfast. Welcome to the art of not starving. Part performance, part endurance, and always, always a gamble. There's no indoor plumbing. There's a bucket. There's an alley. There's an ongoing debate about which is worse. You queue for the communal privy, praying you're not downwind, and count yourself lucky if you escape with both shoes. Let's talk about privacy, or rather, the complete lack of it. In Victorian slums, the concept of me time doesn't extend to bathroom breaks. If you're in a crowded tenement, your toilet is either a battered chamber pot, shared by everyone in the room and possibly the neighbours, or the alleyway out back, which, thanks to a generous policy of first come, first serve, doubles as both a social hub and a biohazard. On special occasions, like Tuesdays, it also serves as the local dog's favourite hangout. The chamber pot sits proudly under the bed or in a dark corner, taunting you. It's chipped, cold, and usually at least half full by morning. You try to ignore the sloshing sound as you shuffle around the room, because nothing says good morning like the threat of a minor flooding event if someone kicks it over. And yes, sometimes someone does. If you're feeling brave or desperate, you'll make the trip to the shared privy out in the yard. The queue is always long, and the gossip is even longer. Everyone's business becomes everyone's business, in every possible way. The walls are thin, and the door doesn't really latch. You get used to the idea that anyone could wander in at any moment, which is great for character development but terrible for your nerves. The smell, of course, is legendary. Victorian London's sewer system is still just a twinkle in some engineer's eye, and the slums are the city's testing ground for how many bodily smells can be contained in a single square mile. You breathe through your mouth, but somehow that just makes it worse. There's a constant contest between rainwater, human waste, and the local livestock for who can produce the strongest aroma. Spoiler, it's always the privy. And then there's the alley option. Sometimes the queue is too long, or the privy is full, it happens, or someone's in there reading a newspaper from last year and you simply can't wait. That's when you take a bucket, if you're lucky, or find a discreet corner and hope nobody's looking out the window. This is why shoes are a luxury, and why stepping in puddles is the original Victorian jump scare. Flushing is a fantasy. Everything is dumped into the gutter or the street, because out of sight is out of mind. And the Thames is always happy to take your troubles away, along with everyone else's. At certain times of day, you'll see people emptying buckets out of windows, hopefully with a loud "Gardez low," watch out for the water, but usually just with a shrug. If you forget to look up while walking down the street, you risk a very special kind of disaster. Toilet paper? Adorable. If you're lucky, you get a scrap of newspaper, already used by 3 people to read about a scandalous sheep. Most of the time, you make do with rags, leaves, or just a stiff upper lip and a strong will. If you have money, you might splurge on a square of soft cloth. If you don't, you perfect the art of minimalism. For kids, going to the toilet is a daily adventure and a major risk factor for losing small toys, siblings, or one's dignity. The local rats are bold, the mud is bottomless, and the odds of falling in are higher than you'd like to admit. Parents warn their children about privy monsters, but the real monsters are germs, lice, and whatever just brushed past your ankle in the dark. By the time you're done, you wash your hands, maybe, if water is available and you can spare a drop. Otherwise, you wipe them on your pants, which is why nothing in the slums is ever truly clean, only less dirty for now. You trudge back to your crowded room, breathing deeply the sweetish London air, and thank your lucky stars you made it out with both shoes, all fingers, and your pride only slightly bruised. Modern life has its challenges, but next time your toilet won't flush, just remember, at least you're not fighting a rat for the last spot in the privy queue. That's what progress smells like. The Victorian home is crowded, chaotic, and smells like a strange blend of boiled cabbage, coal dust, and broken dreams. Privacy is a fantasy. Your room is just a corner with a curtain, and if someone claims your blanket, there's a 30% chance you're never seeing it again. Picture it, a single-room flat if you're lucky, or a windowless cellar if you're not. Every bit of floor space is claimed by some combination of furniture, people, pets, and the local wildlife, mainly rats, who seem to have as many relatives as you do. The family dining table is really just a battered board on crates. There are never enough chairs, so everyone rotates between sitting, squatting, or perching on an overturned bucket. Whoever gets a chair is considered nobility for the meal, and if you stand up for a second, you'll lose your seat and your social status in an instant. Daily life is an ongoing negotiation over resources. Who gets the best spot by the fire? Who's responsible for stirring the dinner pot? And who's supposed to watch the youngest child, a job with a high risk of being peed on? Blankets are worth their weight in gold. Whoever claims one at night sleeps a little warmer, while the rest bundle up in their clothes and a healthy dose of bitterness. Pillows are mythical objects, generally reserved for grandparents, the sick, or anyone with the negotiating skills of a Victorian lawyer. Everything you do in public. If by public you mean in full view of a dozen relatives and probably a neighbour or two who just wandered in. Getting dressed means manoeuvring behind the curtain and hoping no one peeks, but with that many siblings, cousins, and opportunistic rodents, modesty is a team effort. If you're lucky, your home comes with an actual door that closes. If you're not, it's just a curtain and a dream. Mornings are a symphony of chaos. Parents shouting, babies wailing, someone looking for their left boot, and at least one person stirring a suspicious pot on the stove. If you need peace and quiet, your only option is to put your head under the blanket and pretend to be asleep, a strategy that works until someone decides you look too comfortable and accidentally sits on your feet. Mealtimes are organized bedlam. Food is served in one communal dish, and everyone uses whatever utensil they can find. A spoon, a fork, or, in desperate moments, just their hands. You learn to eat fast, because if you don't, you won't get seconds, or, occasionally, firsts. Meals are loud and messy, full of arguments about who took the last potato and whispered alliances over who gets to scrape the pot. If you drop food on the floor, it's fair game for anyone, including the family chicken. Evenings don't bring relief. Instead, the home becomes a human puzzle, as everyone attempts to arrange themselves on the bed, on mats, or across whatever patch of floor seems least likely to give you a splinter. The soundscape is a lullaby of coughs, snores, whispered gossip, and the endless shifting of bodies trying to get comfortable. If you have a secret, forget about keeping it. News travels fast in one room, and nothing is sacred except maybe that one piece of chocolate Aunt Agnes hides in her shoe. The air is always thick with a stew of scents, the lingering aroma of last night's boiled onion, the sharp bite of coal smoke, and a never-ending undercurrent of just a hint of feet. Every now and then, someone attempts to open a window, if you have one, but quickly regrets it when the damp London fog rolls in, bringing with it the smell of the street, which is somehow even worse. Despite the noise, the lack of space, and the never-ending competition for basic comforts, there is an undeniable closeness, sometimes literal, sometimes emotional. Laughter erupts over the silliest things. A cat chasing its own tail, a baby making a face, a joke so old it might predate the invention of bread. When things go wrong, and they do constantly, the family closes ranks. You might squabble over blankets, but when the rent collector comes or someone falls ill, you share what you have and watch each other's backs. So, family life in Victorian poverty is less about cozy firesides and more about survival together. It's a lesson in compromise, a masterclass in shared suffering, and a reminder that sometimes love looks a lot like arguing over who gets the least lumpy bit of mattress. If you can get through a day with your shoes, your seat, and your sanity intact, you're practically winning. Getting dressed is about strategy, not style. You wear everything you own at once, even if half of it doesn't technically fit. Your shoes are more holes than leather, and your scarf is just a cleverly disguised dish towel. Each morning in the slums, dressing isn't a private affair, it's a group event. You rummage through a shared family heap of garments, picking through wool that's more patch than fabric, and holding up shirts that seem to have shrunk, stretched, and shrunk again since yesterday. If it has sleeves, you wear it. If it doesn't, you invent new ways to wrap it around yourself, creating what can only be described as avant-garde hobo chic. Layers aren't just for warmth, they're for defense, against the cold, against the constant itch, and against the embarrassment of indecent exposure whenever the seams give up hope. Your wardrobe is a time capsule of fashion tragedies. You might have a pair of trousers with knees that could pass for ventilation panels, a shirt handed down through 3 siblings and 1 unfortunate cousin, and a jacket so thin you could use it as a sieve. The colour palette? Dirt brown, soot grey, and the unique shade of mystery stain that can only be achieved by living in Victorian England. If you own a hat, it's probably been repaired with bits of twine and wishful thinking. Gloves, meanwhile, are either fingerless or theoretical. Footwear deserves its own tragic song. Shoes, if you have them, are relics, passed from child to child, carefully mended, and inevitably at least 2 sizes too big or too small. Most have holes strategically positioned to let in maximum water with every puddle. Socks are an optional extra, and if you don't have them, you improvise with strips of rag or yesterday's newspaper. And if you're forced to go barefoot, you learn very quickly to dance around the sharp stones, broken glass, and generous gifts left behind by horses, dogs, and the odd-fellow Londoner. Accessories are where true creativity shines. A belt is a length of string. Your scarf is whatever you can find that's longer than it is wide, usually a dish towel, sometimes a strip torn from a former bedsheet, and in one memorable case, a curtain cord. On cold mornings, you wrap yourself up until you resemble a slightly moth-eaten chrysalis, waddling through the mist with a look of resigned dignity. Warmth is the only fashion rule. Style, elegance, and matching colours are a distant fantasy, something for the Queen, or at least the better-off shopkeepers down the road. If you want to look impressive, you borrow your older brother's cap for the day and hope nobody notices you traded away the only pair of mittens last winter for an extra potato. Of course, washing your clothes is another game entirely. Laundry day happens on a strict schedule, namely, when the smell becomes legally actionable. Until then, dirt and grease build up, forming what Victorian children swear is an extra layer of insulation. There's a running joke that you can tell how cold it is by how stiff your shirt gets if you stand it up in the corner at night. And if you do manage to wash something, it's a race against time and damp. Will it dry before it starts to mildew? Will someone else borrow it before you can claim it? The suspense is part of the charm. The best part of layering is, of course, the element of surprise. You never really know what you'll find between the layers. An old crust of bread, a missing button, or perhaps a note from last winter's cold. Every time you peel off a shirt, there's a brief moment of suspense. Will you find your long-lost sock? Or just more evidence that moths find your fashion irresistible? As you walk down the street, wind whistling through your well-ventilated sleeves, you spot neighbours dressed in similarly eclectic get-ups. A small child bundled so thickly they can barely bend their arms. An old man proudly sporting a waistcoat made from a flour sack. A group of girls with shawls that might once have been curtains. In the world of the Victorian poor, fashion is a communal exercise in resourcefulness and gallows humour. You trudge on, every layer a silent victory against the damp and the chill, every mismatched garment proof that, despite everything, you're still standing. If that's not resilience, nothing is. And besides, at least you never have to worry about what's in style. In this neighbourhood, Warmth is always on trend. Every meal is a culinary adventure, and not the good kind. Bread, potatoes, maybe some dripping if you're feeling fancy. If there's meat, you don't ask questions. It's best not to. Let's be honest, if you're poor in Victorian England, you eat for survival, not for pleasure. Dinner isn't an event, it's a rerun. The same actors, bread, potatoes, and the world's least enthusiastic cabbage, perform on your plate morning, noon, and night. What's for supper? Is less a question and more a formality, since the answer is always some variation of, remember what you had yesterday? Well, here it is again, just a bit colder and possibly slightly more mysterious. Bread is the backbone of the diet, but don't picture fluffy loaves with golden crusts. No, your bread is dense, dark, and heavy, likely baked with more filler than flour. Sometimes it's bulked up with sawdust, mashed beans, or even ground up bones if it's been a bad season for wheat. You chip a piece off the loaf, dip it in yesterday's tea or a spoonful of drippings, and hope your teeth are up for the challenge. In some families, bread is rationed with military precision. Whoever cuts the slices is watched with an intensity that would terrify a Victorian headmaster. Potatoes make up the rest of the plate, served boiled, mashed, or fried if you're feeling like royalty, or have found enough lard left over from last month's pork rind. The best part about potatoes is they're filling and hard to ruin. The worst part? They're often sprouting, suspiciously grey, or just barely one step ahead of compost. You eat them anyway, scraping off the eyes, cutting out the green bits, and reassuring yourself that extra flavour means extra nutrition. On a special night, the family might scrape together a few pennies for dripping cooled fat from cooked meat, if you're lucky, or borrowed from the neighbour's roast if you're resourceful. It's spread thinly on bread and savoured, the way modern people might savour truffle oil. Dripping toast is so precious that fights have been started, alliances broken, and lifelong rivalries born over who gets the last drop. Meat is the unicorn of the Victorian poor's dinner table, rare, elusive, and probably not what you think it is. If a scrap of beef, a slice of mutton, or a dubious sausage appears, nobody asks where it came from, or why it smells vaguely of regret. The rule is simple. If it's edible, eat it. If it's questionable, eat it quickly. You become an expert in meat optimism, the art of assuming that everything tastes better with enough mustard, and that what you don't know can't hurt you, until it does, in the form of a stomachache later. Vegetables are, technically, part of the meal, though vegetable in this context usually means turnips, onions, or cabbage boiled into surrender. Carrots appear if it's a good week, but mostly you get whatever's cheap and in season. The flavour profile is best described as boiled until it gives up. If you're lucky, someone sneaks a sprig of parsley onto the table, and for a brief, shining moment, you taste something green. The repetition doesn't end there. You often eat leftovers from breakfast or lunch, sometimes reshuffled, sometimes just reheated, if you can afford the coal. Stew pots are never truly empty. They're topped up with whatever scraps are available, slowly developing a personality of their own. It's said that some Victorian families kept the same stew going for weeks, adding water, root vegetables, and hope with each passing day. Despite the monotony, mealtimes can be noisy, crowded, and surprisingly cheerful. Siblings jostle for the best bits. Someone inevitably tries to sneak an extra piece of bread. Jokes fly, arguments break out, and for a little while, everyone forgets how hungry they'll be again in an hour. You talk about your day, gossip about neighbours, and dream, out loud, about what you'd eat if you were suddenly rich. Spoiler: it's usually pie, pudding, or meat you can actually identify. And when the plates are scraped clean, and the last crumb is licked from a dirty spoon, you sit back and marvel at your own resilience. Because no matter how many times you have breakfast for dinner, or dinner for breakfast, you survive. It may not be glamorous, but it gets you through, one hard crust and boiled potato at a time. You hear scratching in the walls and hope it's just the neighbours. But it's not. It's rats, bold as brass, strutting around like they pay rent. Sometimes you name them for fun. Sometimes you wonder if they'd share their snacks. In Victorian England, the line between pet and pest is blurry, and your relationship with the local rat population is both adversarial and weirdly intimate. These aren't the timid little field mice you read about in fairy tales. These are city rats, giant, fearless, and so confident you half expect them to ask for their own set of house keys. They have no respect for personal boundaries, personal space, or personal property. At night, they emerge from the cracks in the wall, the holes in the floorboards, and the mysterious void beneath the bed, embarking on their nightly adventures like tiny, fur-coated aristocrats attending the rat equivalent of a ball. Your first instinct is horror, but after the third or fourth sleepless night, you settle into a strange routine. The scratching and squeaking becomes background noise, like a Victorian white noise machine. Occasionally, you toss a boot in their general direction, not so much to hurt them, they're far too fast and streetwise for that, but as a kind of gentle suggestion that perhaps tonight they could keep it down. If you have little siblings, the rats become an inescapable part of bedtime stories. That's Reginald, the big one. He likes bread crusts and hates loud noises. Or there's Mabel. She's harmless, unless you leave your socks out. You'd be surprised how quickly children adapt. After a few weeks, naming rats is less an act of defeat and more an exercise in Victorian resilience. It's easier to sleep when you pretend the rat racing across your blanket is just passing through on important business, not casing your toes for a midnight snack. Food storage is a constant battle. You hide scraps in tins, hang bread from the rafters in string bags, and develop the reflexes of a professional burglar just to defend the family's potato stash. The rats, for their part, view every new storage solution as a fun puzzle to solve before breakfast. If they had thumbs, you suspect they'd be opening the cupboards and critiquing your flavor choices. Sometimes, if you're very unlucky, you wake up to find that the rats have beaten you to breakfast. Half a loaf of bread, gone. A wedge of cheese, vanished, except for a trail of crumbs and a note of thanks, probably. There are stories of entire stews being sampled during the night, leaving behind only tiny paw prints and a deep sense of betrayal. In the worst cases, families find that rats have chewed holes in boots, shredded blankets for bedding, or, in truly dramatic fashion, help themselves to the remains of a Sunday roast. The one time a month there is such a thing. There are rat catchers, of course, children and adults alike who make a living chasing down these furry freeloaders, usually with more enthusiasm than actual results. Some families keep a cat, but the average Victorian cat is more likely to join the rats in a collaborative snack raid than put up much of a fight. Besides, there's only so much one cat can do against what sometimes feels like the entire rodent population of London. Of course, rats aren't just a nuisance, they're a health hazard. Everyone knows someone whose family lost a child to rat bites, or whose cousin caught something nasty from contaminated flour. Disease travels with the rats, fleas, lice, whatever else they carry in their glossy, questionably cute fur. In the great rat race, it's often neck and neck between who spreads more chaos, the rodents or the humans fighting a losing battle against them. Yet, for all their faults, the rats are a fact of life, and life goes on. You wrap up your bread, tuck your toes in, and try not to think about what's rustling under the bed. If you're lucky, the rats will stick to the shadows tonight. If you're not, well, maybe Reginald will leave you a crumb in return. In the end, the real secret to surviving the Victorian slums isn't defeating the rats, it's learning to coexist. If you can't beat them, you can always blame them for missing food, lost socks, or the mysterious holes in your last good shirt. And in a world where you share everything, your meals, your bed, your last nerve, it's oddly comforting to know that even your misfortunes have company. By age 6, you're already on your second career. Chimney sweep, match girl, mudlark, Victorian poor kids work jobs that sound like rejected Mario Kart characters. Adults have it even worse. Endless shifts in factories, docks, or anywhere someone's desperate enough to hire you. Work starts with the sunrise, or whatever passes for morning light through the smoky haze of London. Your body is still stiff from a night spent on a straw mattress, but there's no time to stretch if you're late. There's a lineup of hungry neighbours waiting to take your place. Childhood is a luxury for the rich, and you learn that quickly. By the time you're old enough to walk, you're old enough to earn your keep, whether that means sorting through coal at the gasworks, scouring the mud along the river for bits of metal, or squeezing into chimneys with a brush, lungs, and a prayer. The jobs are as varied as they are miserable. Chimney sweeps, usually the smallest kids, because they're the only ones who fit, crawl through soot-choked flues with nothing but a rag, and the hope that they don't get stuck. If you're lucky, you come out covered in black dust, hacking up soot, and with all your limbs intact. If you're not, well, at least you saved your family the cost of breakfast. Maybe you're a mudlark, wading through the thick Thames mud at low tide, searching for anything with resale value. Bones, nails, bits of rope, dead rats, nothing goes to waste. You develop an eye for treasure, but mostly it's trash, and you count your haul by the number of blisters you collect. Match girls wander the streets, bundles of wooden matches slung over their shoulders, trying to sell a dozen for a penny while their fingers turn numb in the cold. If you can't sell, you don't eat. Adults face the same grind, just with fewer excuses and more back pain. Factories loom over the city like mechanical monsters, spinning, weaving, clanking day and night. Your mother might spend 12 hours a day feeding cotton into a deafening loom, her hands raw and swollen, her eyes bloodshot from dust and exhaustion. Your father, if he's lucky enough to find work, could be hauling sacks at the docks, shifting coal, or hammering away in a foundry where the heat could boil an egg and the foreman's temper could curdle milk. Work is never safe. Fingers are lost to machinery, skin is blistered by acid, lungs are coated with dust. Accidents are frequent, compensation non-existent. If you're injured, you get replaced. If you're too sick to show up, you go hungry. The competition is relentless, and wages are always just low enough to keep you desperate. Some people piece together a living from odd jobs, shoe shining, errand running, hauling water, sweeping streets, or, in truly desperate times, picking pockets. There are endless ways to hustle, and every new day brings a fresh scheme. Maybe today you'll try selling newspapers, or busking on a corner with a borrowed accordion and a song your grandmother swore would bring you luck. Spoiler, it won't. Women and girls often work as washerwomen, scrubbing mountains of filthy laundry for the wealthy hot water if you're lucky. Raw knuckles and soap burns, always. Others take in sewing or mending, fingers pricked raw from endless hours with a needle, squinting by candlelight just to stitch another penny's worth. Despite the misery, there's a strange camaraderie. You share a wink with another chimney sweep. You swap stories with fellow mudlarks about the weirdest things you've found in the river. You laugh, sometimes, at the absurdity of it all. And, sometimes, you dream, just a little, about something better. A job that doesn't leave you coughing up soot. Or a day when your hands stop aching before midnight. But for now, you grit your teeth, wipe your nose on your sleeve, and keep hustling. The work never ends, but neither does your stubborn hope. And if nothing else, you'll always have a job, at least until you grow too big, too slow, or too tired for the endless Victorian shuffle. And then, you'll find another, because in this world, giving up just isn't an option. Washing is reserved for special occasions and major life events, like weddings, funerals, or a sudden outbreak of lice. The bathwater is communal, reused, and somewhere between tepid and sentient. You emerge only slightly cleaner, but a lot more skeptical about water. Let's start with the basics. In the Victorian slums, soap is a luxury and bathing is a group sport. Most days, your bath involves a quick splash from a chipped basin in the corner, usually with water that looks suspiciously familiar because it's been used by at least 3 other people before you. By the time your turn rolls around, The water is a murky soup of mystery substances, half of which you'd rather not try to identify. Still, you cup your hands, brace for the chill, and scrub at your face, hoping to remove at least the top layer of London grime. Actual baths, the kind you dream about while shivering in bed, require serious planning. First, someone has to fetch the water. No easy task when the nearest pump is 2 streets over and the line is longer than the workhouse lunch queue. Then you have to heat it over the fire, which means finding enough coal, which means somebody is about to have a very cold night. By the time the tub is filled, everyone's already arguing over who gets to go first. The family's pecking order is on full display. Babies and the elderly first, then the least dirty, and finally, whoever draws the short straw and gets to stew in the leftovers. There are no scented candles, no rubber duckies, and definitely no Instagram moments. The closest you come to aromatherapy is a vague whiff of coal smoke and last week's cabbage. Soap, if you have it, is rationed like treasure. It's usually a sliver rescued from its slow death by the kitchen sink, too precious to use except on the Sabbath, or when someone's itching in a way that makes everyone nervous. When you do get to use soap, it burns your eyes, stings your cuts, and smells like industrial lemons left out in the rain. Still, you lather up, scrub as best you can, and then wonder if you're actually cleaner, or if you've just swapped one set of germs for another. Clothes washing follows a similar logic. Wait until the dirt is visible from space, then spend an entire day hauling, scrubbing, wringing, and cursing. The river is the poor person's laundromat, but it's also everyone else's. The fishmonger, the tanner, the guy dumping chamber pots out his window. The water is cold enough to reanimate the dead, and your hands go numb within minutes. Stains are a point of pride. Each patch tells a story, and every rip is proof you've survived another week. Daily hygiene is a patchwork affair. Teeth are brushed with a rag or not at all. Hair is washed when absolutely necessary, usually with cold water and wishful thinking. Combs are shared, lost, and found again in the most unlikely places, sometimes attached to the family cat. Fleas and lice are as much a part of your household as your siblings, and you develop a stoic tolerance for the constant itch. Some nights, you play find the flea just to pass the time. Winning isn't as fun as it sounds. Illness is a permanent houseguest. Coughs, sniffles, rashes, boils. Everyone has something, and everyone's convinced it's just the weather. Doctors are for the wealthy, so you make do with home remedies, vinegar washes, herbal poultices, and the comforting belief that what doesn't kill you builds character. Sometimes it's true. Sometimes it's just a nice thing to say before bed. Despite the odds people manage, there are moments, rare, precious, when you feel clean, if only for an hour. A new bar of soap arrives, or it rains hard enough to wash the worst of the city off your face. You swap stories about who smelled the worst after bath night. It's always Uncle Billy. And laugh about the time someone found a fish in the laundry tub. Hygiene, like everything else in the slums, is a shared ordeal. You're never alone, not even in the bath. And so you press on, armed with a rag, a comb, and the knowledge that tomorrow you'll do it all over again. Because in Victorian England, cleanliness isn't next to godliness. It's just another thing you try to do together, with a bar of soap, a good sense of humour, and nerves of steel. Beds are more suggestion than reality. You pile in with siblings, parents, and whoever's visiting that week. Someone always has cold feet, someone else always snores. You try not to think about what lives in the mattress. The concept of personal space is not only foreign, it's actively discouraged by necessity. In your tiny Victorian dwelling, beds are communal territory, claimed nightly by whoever gets there first, or whoever has the best excuse. I've got the chills, I'm the smallest, or I'm already in the bed. You figure it out. If you're lucky, you might share with only one other person. If you're not, you could be sandwiched between siblings, a cousin visiting for just a few days, read indefinitely, and possibly the family cat, who will take the warmest spot and defend it like a furry general. Blankets are another source of drama. There are never enough. The thickest ones have been patched and repatched, stitched with love, desperation, and leftover scraps from old clothes. The thin ones are more symbolic than effective, but you cling to them anyway, rolling up like a Victorian burrito and hoping you end up on the warm side of the bed. Waking up in the middle of the night, you find the covers have migrated to the far edge, usually occupied by someone small, innocent-looking, and very determined not to give them back. Of course, not everyone gets a bed. Floor space, mats, and even chairs become fair game for overflow sleepers. In some households, children sleep head to foot to maximize room, a risky strategy if you're sensitive to cold toes. There's a rotating system of who sleeps closest to the door, the coldest spot, and who gets the honor of the middle, the warmest, but also the hardest to escape if you need to get up in the night. It's less bedtime routine and more nightly negotiations, with alliances formed and broken over pillow rights. Speaking of pillows, good luck. Most are lumps of old fabric, straw, or, on particularly desperate nights, someone's coat rolled up and shared between three heads. If you're very unlucky, you end up with the infamous mystery pillow, so lumpy and oddly shaped it could qualify as a minor character in your family's history. You wake up with a crick in your neck and a firm conviction that someone moved the pillow on purpose. They probably did. Mattresses, if they can be called that, are stuffed with straw, old rags, and whatever else is soft, or at least softer than the bare floor. Over time, they settle into distinct geological strata, the upper layer of relatively fresh straw, the middle layer of ancient crumbs and dust, and the mysterious lower layer where only the bravest dare to reach. The mattress is alive with sensation, prickly bits of straw, springs that creak ominously, and the occasional rustle that suggests something else has taken up residence. You try not to think about it as you drift off to sleep, pulling the blanket tighter around your shoulders and tucking your toes away from any suspicious gaps. Nighttime is never truly silent. Siblings whisper secrets, parents sigh in their sleep, and the rhythmic chorus of snores, coughs, and muttered dreams blends with the distant sound of city life outside. If you're lucky, you'll drift off in the rare moment when everyone is finally quiet, only to be startled awake by someone turning over, kicking you in the shin, or starting a midnight quest for the chamber pot. If you're not lucky, the baby wakes up, and then it's everyone's problem. Sharing beds isn't just about warmth, it's about survival. The combined body heat is the closest thing to central heating you'll ever know, and the reassurance of feeling a sibling's foot or hearing your father's familiar snore is oddly comforting, even when you wish it wasn't so loud. When someone falls ill, you all crowd closer, sharing warmth and germs in equal measure. And yet, for all the discomfort, sharing beds means sharing everything else. Laughter, stories, late-night whispers, and the hope that tomorrow might bring more blankets or fewer cold feet. If you're lucky, you wake up still under the covers, with all your toes intact, and with just enough space to dream about a bed of your own someday, preferably with a mattress that doesn't make decisions for you. Until then, you make do, because that's what Victorian poverty teaches best. How to share, how to adapt, and how to find a little comfort in the chaos, even if it means sleeping with your knees in someone's back and your dreams in someone else's pillow. Toys? That's adorable. You get a stick, a hoop, and a vivid imagination. Most fun involves mud, shouting, and games that require at least one child to cry before it's over. In the cramped, damp streets of Victorian England, childhood isn't exactly the carefree golden age you see in oil paintings. It's less rosy-cheeked innocence and more try not to break your arm falling out of a tree made entirely of splinters. For the poorest children, entertainment is anything that isn't work, punishment, or a surprise rat attack. Mornings start early, with a to-do list as long as the Thames. Before you even think about play, there's water to fetch, younger siblings to wrangle, and the daily battle of sweeping out the family's corner of the flat, meaning you move the dirt from one spot to another and call it progress. Chores are assigned by age, height, and how quickly you can look busy when your mother comes around the corner. If you finish early, congratulations. There's always another job waiting. If you try to skip out, your older brother will remind you, with words or, more effectively, a well-placed nudge. But even in a world of endless work, children find ways to squeeze out a bit of fun. The street is your playground, the mud your canvas, and the neighbour's laundry line's your personal jungle gym. Toys, as we know them, are mostly wishful thinking. Maybe you're lucky enough to inherit a rag doll that's been patched more times than your trousers. Maybe you trade treasures, a broken comb, a shiny button, or, on a really good day, a marble found in the gutter. For most, play means making do. A hoop and stick is the go-to entertainment. You chase it down muddy lanes until someone falls over, gets their foot stuck, or the hoop ends up in a puddle so deep it could qualify as a minor canal. Sticks are endlessly adaptable. Sword, wand, fishing pole, imaginary pet. You might gather with friends to play kick the can, with a can that probably once held something more mysterious than food, or challenge each other to hopscotch drawn with a bit of chalk. If you can steal a stub from the workhouse school, games are raucous, competitive, and usually end in tears, laughter, or both. There are no medals, just pride, bruised knees, and the occasional scolding from an adult when the noise gets out of hand. The bravest attempt acrobatics on whatever discarded debris the street provides, but every jump is a risk. Is that pile of hay covering a brick, a rat, or a neighbour's lost boot? Find out the hard way. Of course, play and work are often mixed. Sometimes you turn chores into games, who can fill the water bucket fastest, or who can find the biggest potato in the garden. The losers might have to swap their bread crust at dinner, but the winners get bragging rights and, if they're lucky, a pat on the back that doesn't turn into a new chore. Imagination is the real toy. The flat's curtain becomes a cape, the coal scuttle a pirate's treasure chest, and the alley behind the house a secret fortress. Stories are currency. You invent wild tales of sea monsters in the Thames, of secret tunnels under the city, or of the one time Tommy swears he saw the Queen in a borrowed bonnet. Spoiler, it was just old Mrs. Garvey, but never let the truth get in the way of a good story. Children invent games to cope with the ever-present dangers of the city. A favourite is Dodge the Night Soil Man, which involves a real risk of disaster, and Don't Wake the Constable, a tense game of hide-and-seek that ends poorly for anyone who loses. There's always mischief, swapping shoes, hiding someone's sock, or daring your mate to knock on the workhouse door and run away. Just enough trouble to keep things interesting, but not enough to get sent to bed early, hopefully. Yet, despite the mud, the fights, and the lack of toys, there's a kind of freedom in the chaos. You learn to share, to adapt, to make something out of nothing. When you finally collapse into your shared bed at night, dirt still smudged on your cheeks, you fall asleep with your stick and hoop tucked safely by your side, ready for whatever adventures tomorrow's mud might bring. Laundry happens once in a blue moon. You haul your rags to the river. Scrub until your fingers freeze and hope your clothes make it back in roughly the same colour. If not, fashion is overrated anyway. You know it's laundry day in the slums because suddenly every surface is covered in mysterious damp garments and the air is thick with equal parts soap, river fog, and low expectations. The decision to actually wash your clothes is a serious one. You wait until there's no possible way you can go another day in those socks, when the family cat gives you a judgmental look, or your shirt can stand up on its own in the corner. You know it's time. First, you gather the laundry. A collection of shirts, trousers, underthings if you own any, socks with more holes than fabric, and a collection of handkerchiefs that double as napkins, washcloths, and sometimes emergency dust masks. You stuff the whole mess into a basket or an old sack and set out with your siblings in tow. Everyone tries to hide their least embarrassing undergarments at the bottom of the pile. But let's face it, there's no dignity on laundry day. The Thames isn't exactly the sparkling blue river you see on postcards. It's more of a murky, brownish soup, flavored by a century of dumped chamber pots, factory runoff, and mysterious objects floating by. You pick a spot that seems slightly less questionable than the rest, roll up your sleeves, and brace yourself for the water, icy, gritty, and enthusiastic about numbing your hands as quickly as possible. The shock is immediate. Your fingers ache, but there's no time for complaints. You're on the clock, and the sun won't last long. You attack the laundry with soap, if you have any. Otherwise, you improvise with sand, ashes, or sheer willpower. Scrubbing boards are a luxury, so most washing is done with bare knuckles, elbows, and a healthy dose of determination. If you're lucky, your shirt will come out with only a few new holes. If not, well, at least it'll be clean holes. Laundry day isn't just a chore, it's a community event. Dozens of other families line the banks, each one vying for the best spot and swapping news over the sound of frantic scrubbing. Local gossip flows as freely as the water. Who's got a new job, whose husband is missing again, whose child found a penny and spent it all on licorice. Someone always manages to bring up the neighbour who lost half her clothes to the current last month, an unspoken warning to keep a tight grip on your socks. Rinsing is a delicate operation. You dip the garments in the water, swirl them around, and try not to think about what just brushed past your hand. Every so often, a shirt escapes downstream, and a lively chase ensues, children darting along the bank, mothers shouting encouragement, and sometimes unrepeatable advice. If you recover it, great. If not, well, maybe someone in Greenwich will enjoy a surprise delivery. Hauling wet clothes home is an ordeal. The bundle is now 3 times as heavy, dripping steadily and leaving a trail back to your building. You drape everything over lines strung between windows, across chairs, and over every available piece of furniture. The smell of damp wool fills the room, mixing with the lingering odour of boiled cabbage and coal smoke. On a sunny day, things might dry before they mildew. On a typical London day, you just hope they don't freeze solid or get snatched by an enterprising neighbour or pigeon. By evening, the house is transformed into an obstacle course of drying shirts and fluttering underthings. Siblings argue about who gets the warmest spot by the stove for their socks, and everyone hopes the wind doesn't kick up and send the whole lot flying into the street. You survey the results with a mix of pride and resignation. Some items are now slightly smaller, some are oddly stretched, and a few are a completely new colour, courtesy of a mysterious dye transfer. But they're cleaner, at least for a day. And that's laundry day, a heroic, damp, communal saga that leaves you exhausted, chafed, and only marginally less smelly. You know you'll have to do it all again, eventually. But for now, you sleep in clothes that smell almost fresh, and that, in Victorian England, is what passes for luxury. Everyone coughs, all the time. The air is thick with coal dust, chimney smoke, and the gentle perfume of open sewers. If you're not coughing, check your pulse. In Victorian England, coughing isn't just a symptom, it's a way of life, an ambient background noise, like church bells or street vendors. The sound of hacking, wheezing, and throat-clearing echoes through the streets and houses, a kind of communal symphony that lets you know you're still among the living, if not exactly thriving. "You all right, love?" is as much a greeting as a health check. The reasons for the endless cough are all around you. Start with the coal. Every house, no matter how humble, burns it for warmth and cooking, filling rooms with a haze that settles on everything, including your lungs. By age 5, you've mastered the art of coughing politely, sneezing into your sleeve, and ignoring the persistent tickle in your throat. If you're a chimney sweep, you're breathing in soot directly, the black dust turning your spit grey, and your cough's dramatic enough to be mistaken for a stage performance. Outside, the air isn't much better. The city's factories pump out billows of smoke day and night, and the narrow alleyways trap it like soup in a pot. Add to this the fragrant contribution of 1,000 open sewers and the ever-present horse manure, and you've got an atmosphere that's rich in local flavour. On foggy mornings, you wake to a world where breathing feels like drinking from a muddy puddle, and the only thing sharper than the chill is the scent of the Thames at low tide. Of course, most families live in crowded rooms with precious little ventilation. Windows are a luxury, and opening them is only considered if you enjoy a strong breeze of cold, damp misery. Your mattress, made of straw and ancient secrets, holds in the dust and damp, becoming a breeding ground for everything that makes a cough worse: mold, mildew, and whatever lives under the bed. At night, the coughing chorus resumes with gusto, one person's hacking setting off a chain reaction up and down the block. The doctors, when you see them, call it consumption, catarrh, or the ague, but nobody really knows what causes it, and remedies range from the useless to the alarming. Grandma recommends a spoonful of onion syrup or a hot mustard plaster slapped on your chest. Aunt Mabel swears by goose fat rubbed on the feet and socks warmed by the fire. Some neighbours put their faith in patent medicines, bought from street hawkers with names like Dr. Pumblechook's balsamic lung elixir or the genuine universal remedy, both guaranteed to cure you, or at least distract you with a very dramatic side effect. For the truly unlucky, the cough doesn't go away. It lingers, gnawing at your strength, turning from an annoyance to a threat. Tuberculosis, consumption, is the spectre everyone dreads. Thinning faces and draining colour from cheeks, while the afflicted are banished to back rooms and open windows, as if fresh air could undo years of coal and misery. Children cough themselves hoarse through winter, but most recover, bouncing back with an alarming resilience. The old and the weak often don't. Every family knows someone taken by the cough, remembered with a sigh and a shake of the head. Despite all this, life goes on. You wrap your scarf tighter, take your medicine, whether it's onion syrup or just hope, and go about your day. Work continues, chores pile up, and if you're clever, you use your cough as an excuse to avoid the worst jobs. Sorry, Ma, can't scrub today. My lungs sound like a dying kettle. It rarely works, but it's worth a try. You joke about it with your friends, whose cough sounds the worst, whose spit is the most artistic shade of grey, whose family has the loudest midnight chorus. Laughter mixes with the wheezing because humour, like a cough, is impossible to suppress. And when you finally fall asleep, throat sore and chest rattling, you count your blessings. You're still breathing, still kicking, and still complaining, which in Victorian England means you're winning. You walk to the market with 3 coins and a dream. Everything smells amazing and costs too much. You settle for a shriveled carrot and a lingering sense of disappointment. The Victorian street market is a feast for the senses and a test of your self-control. The air is alive with shouts of vendors hawking everything from fresh bread, you can smell it from 2 streets over, to suspicious-looking eels squirming in shallow barrels. Children dart through the crowd, mothers bargain with the fishmonger, and everyone seems to have the same resigned expression. Hope mingled with the knowledge that hope rarely gets you a discount. Your budget is, in a word, theoretical. You start with good intentions and a mental shopping list, but your handful of coins quickly shrinks with each transaction. Flour, potatoes, maybe an onion, if you're feeling optimistic. You pass by piles of apples, stacks of cabbages, and baskets of eggs, each one taunting you with the memory of what it's like to eat something that didn't start its life in a cellar. You eye the butcher's stall, hoping to spot a bone with just enough meat left for a soup, but so does everyone else, and competition is fierce. The butcher eyes you back, making it clear that every scrap is precious, and the word discount is not in his vocabulary. If you want something special, like a lump of cheese or a few slices of ham, you're in for a negotiation that would make a diplomat sweat. You muster your bravest look, ask the price, and try not to flinch when it's double what you hoped. Sometimes you try a bit of the old, "Please, sir, my siblings haven't tasted cheese since last Christmas, but the vendor has heard it all before and will only drop the price if he's in a very generous mood." Generosity, it turns out, is rare on market day. The fishmonger is next, and the offerings are as diverse as they are dubious. Fresh herring glisten in the morning light, but the price is high, and you have your doubts about just how fresh they really are. At the end of the stall, there's always a basket of something mysterious. Today it's jellied eels, quivering gently and daring you to try them. You don't. Your dreams are haunted enough already. Every purchase is weighed and measured, literally. A loaf of bread is set on the scales, and you watch with eagle eyes to make sure you get every crumb you paid for. You walk away, clutching your precious bundle, already calculating how to stretch it to feed twice as many people as it ought. If you're lucky, you spot a deal on bruised fruit or yesterday's bread, hard as a brick, but still technically edible. You take what you can get. Some vendors offer credit, but it's a risky business. Borrow today, pay back with tomorrow's wages, if they come, and hope the debt collector doesn't come knocking before you've scraped together enough coins. Many families live market to market, week to week, always one bad day away from going hungry. The market isn't just about food. You might need a candle, a bit of coal, or a piece of string. Every purchase is a calculation. Do you spend your last penny on a carrot for the stew or a candle so you can see after dark? Most of the time, you choose the carrot and eat dinner by moonlight. By the end of your market run, you're left with a paltry collection of tired vegetables, a chunk of bread, and the realization that shopping is mostly just the art of lowering your standards. Still, there's a kind of pride in making it work, turning a handful of pennies and a lot of hope into a meal, even if it's not the meal you dreamed of. You head home through the bustling streets, dodging carts and children, passing wealthier shoppers with baskets full of things you can only imagine tasting. But you hold your head high, because in Victorian England, surviving the market with your dignity and most of your coins intact is a small miracle, and for now, that's enough. Coal is life, coal is warmth, coal is expensive. You ration it like gold, lighting a fire only when someone threatens to turn into a human icicle. Most of the time, you just shiver and share body heat with anyone nearby, including pets, family, and the occasional rat. In Victorian England, winter isn't so much a season as it is a test of endurance. The bitter chill creeps in long before the first frost, settling into your bones, your bed, and your very soul. The lucky families have a coal scuttle with enough lumps to get them through the night. The rest, well, they make do with what they have, which often means exactly nothing. The day begins with a debate. Is it cold enough to use a precious piece of coal, or can you all just be brave for another few hours? Someone is always pushing for a fire, usually the youngest, or the oldest, or anyone with a pulse and a memory of what warmth feels like. The person in charge of the coal, often your mother, guards the scuttle like it contains the family jewels. One lump now is one less for later, and there are always more cold days than coal. If the answer is yes, the ritual begins. You gather kindling, bits of newspaper, splinters from the firewood pile, even dried potato peels. Coal is laid on top, and you all crowd around, watching the first glow as if it were a sunrise in the Sahara. The warmth, when it finally comes, is glorious but stingy. Only the immediate area in front of the hearth benefits. If you're more than a few feet away, you might as well be sitting outside. Positioning is everything. The prime spots are fiercely contested. Siblings argue, pets muscle their way in, and anyone who leaves to fetch water risks losing their place. Even the rats, opportunists to the core, edge closer, unbothered by company as long as there's heat. The fire is fed sparingly. When it burns low, everyone debates whether to add another lump or just wait and see. Wait and see wins most of the time. At night, the fire is allowed to die, the embers glowing weakly as the house plunges back into the cold. Blankets are piled high, bodies huddled together, every breath visible in the frigid air. You become an expert at sharing warmth, spooning for survival with siblings, clutching the family dog, or just curling into the smallest possible ball. If you're lucky, your feet don't turn numb. If you're not, you spend the night dreaming of hot water bottles, or even just dry socks. When the coal runs out, desperate measures kick in. Children are dispatched to scavenge for fallen twigs, bits of discarded crate, anything that burns. There's a black market for coal dust. Families sweep up whatever residue they can find and press it into makeshift briquettes, which burn quick and dirty but beat freezing to death. Sometimes, you borrow from a neighbour's pile or, if you're truly daring, sneak a piece from the delivery wagon on the corner. Morality is important, but so is not turning into a Victorian popsicle. On rare, windfall days, someone brings home a surprise stash, maybe a bonus for extra work, a bit of luck on the street, or a gift from a kind-hearted soul. Those nights, you celebrate. Soup simmers on the stove, socks dry by the fire, and the entire family crowds into the warmest room to bask in the brief luxury of not shivering. Still, you're always thinking about the next cold snap, the next fuel crisis, the next argument about whose turn it is to sit closest. Winter never really ends. It just pauses for a few weeks in June. So you adapt. You toughen up. You invent games like who can hold their hands over the fire the longest and guess how many toes you'll have come spring. You learn to savor every flicker of heat, every rare evening when your breath doesn't hang in the air. And you remind yourself, coal may be expensive, but resilience is free. And in the great coal struggle, that's what keeps you going when the fire burns low. You know everything about your neighbours, whether you want to or not. Thin walls mean every argument, song, and mysterious thump is public knowledge. You learn to ignore most noises, except when you can't. In a Victorian slum, privacy is a distant fantasy, like fresh fruit in February or a rent collector with a sense of humour. Instead, life is conducted out loud and in public whether you like it or not. Every house is stitched to the next. Every window opens onto someone else's window. And the walls, such as they are, might as well be made of tissue paper and wishful thinking. The moment you wake up, you know who else in the building woke up first. Was it old Mr. Scully barking at his daughter, over burnt porridge again? Or the Bennets, launching into their daily who took the last of the tea debate, which will escalate into a full-volume opera before breakfast is even on the table? You recognize your neighbors by their coughs, their footsteps, their laughter, and, inevitably, their choice of lullabies, some sweet, some questionably on-key. You know who snores, who talks in their sleep, and who sings sea shanties at 2 a.m., even though he's never seen the ocean. The sound of a broom handle banging against the ceiling is the building's universal language for please, for the love of Queen Victoria, be quiet. But it rarely works. Instead, noise flows from flat to flat like the Thames after a rainstorm, constant, unstoppable, and full of surprises. Sometimes you pick up entire conversations without meaning to. Prentice's scandalous tales about her cousin's neighbour's baker, or young Jimmy's very loud campaign to convince his mother that a pet ferret is essential for household morale. You know when someone gets good news, cheering, singing, sometimes even a toast. And you absolutely know when someone gets bad news. Sudden silence, then a door slamming hard enough to rattle the spoons. But it's not just voices and drama. The architecture of your home ensures you're intimately familiar with your neighbour's plumbing, or lack thereof. When the Bennets dump their bucket out the window, you hear it. When the Joneses have a leak, your wall gets damp. The communal privy, with its never-ending queue and running commentary, provides a symphony of groans, laughter, and occasionally, a debate over whose turn it is to fix the broken latch. You always know when the rat catcher's in business. The screams echo for blocks. Of course, it's not all annoyance and eavesdropping. Sometimes, the sounds are comforting. A baby's sleepy giggle, a lullaby drifting through the cracks, the steady clatter of someone kneading bread next door. On especially cold nights, laughter and stories pass from one flat to another, creating a kind of makeshift community radio. You might not have your own space, but you're never truly alone. Even the local cats contribute with their operatic midnight yowling, an ongoing performance with mixed reviews. Still, some noises can't be ignored, no matter how hard you try. The distant wail of an ambulance cart, the urgent knocking of the rent collector, or the sharp clatter of an unexpected visitor. Every now and then, the shouting turns ugly, arguments over money, food, or things best left unsaid. You lie still, heart pounding, hoping the night stays uneventful, or at least uneventful enough for you to get some sleep. But most of the time, you adapt. You develop selective hearing. The Bennets can scream about tea until the cows come home, and you don't even flinch. Someone's banging pots at midnight? You call it ambience. The best sleepers swear they could snooze through a brass band and a goat stampede. Living this way means you know your neighbours, maybe too well. You know their struggles, their victories, their favourite curse words, and their worst secrets. And they know yours. It's a noisy, leaky, chaotic web of life. And while you might sometimes wish for a little peace and quiet, deep down, you know you'd miss it if it ever truly went silent. After all, in a world where the walls have ears and leaks, you're never truly alone, even if you wish you were, just for 5 blessed minutes. Water comes from a pump down the street, and every sip is a gamble. Boiling helps, sometimes. Other times you just hope your immune system has a good sense of humour. In the world of Victorian poverty, getting a glass of water is less of a refreshing ritual and more of a high-stakes game. Forget filtered faucets and sparkling spring bottles. Your only source is the public pump, a battered iron contraption planted somewhere between the local market and the nearest open drain. If you're lucky, it's a short walk. If you're not, it's a daily expedition through mud, manure, and crowds, balancing a heavy bucket and trying to avoid getting jostled by someone else's equally desperate dash for hydration. The water itself is optimistic. On a good day, it looks clear, maybe even tastes fresh. On a bad day, it's suspiciously cloudy, carrying a faint tang of iron or worse, a gentle whiff of something distinctly urban. Most people learn not to look too closely at what's floating on the surface. Bits of grit, flecks of soot, the occasional unidentifiable squiggle. You do your best to skim these out with a ladle, or just shut your eyes and swallow quickly. Character building, they call it. Everyone in your street swears by different water handling rituals. Some insist that boiling water makes it safe, so you set a kettle over the fire and hope you remember to let it cool before the youngest child gets impatient. Of course, boiling means burning coal, and coal costs money, so you start to do the math. Is it worth the extra warmth to avoid spending the night in the privy? Some days, you roll the dice and drink it raw, with a prayer and the resigned acceptance that you might regret it by morning. Not that you have much choice. The alternative is being thirsty, and that's simply not an option when you spend your day running errands, scrubbing steps, or chasing the family's one precious shilling up and down the street. If the water tastes odd, you can always add a splash of weak tea. Anything to disguise the flavour and convince yourself you're having a real treat. Of course, everyone has their own cure for bad water. Some mothers squeeze a bit of lemon peel in, if they can find it. Others toss in a spoonful of vinegar, though it rarely improves the flavour. On particularly desperate days, you might drop a slice of stale bread in the jug, because if you're going to tempt fate, you might as well be full at the same time. But lurking behind every sip is the real danger. Disease, cholera, dysentery, typhoid. They're not just words in a medical book, they're next-door neighbours. Everyone knows someone who got the runs after a dodgy bucketful, or worse, fell ill and didn't get up again. You hear the warnings, "Don't drink from the south pump, Mrs. Plank. Turner's boy came down with the fever." Or, "That well by the alley? Full of rats. Just you wait." And so you hedge your bets, switching pumps now and then, hoping the water gods are feeling merciful this week. Collecting water is a chore, and a social one at that. You queue at the pump with neighbours, trading stories, gossip, and grimaces as someone inevitably spills half their bucket and has to start over. There are days when the pump is broken, the water's run dry, or the city men are digging up the street again to fix the pipes. Those days, you scrape together every last drop in the house, using wash water for soup or squeezing damp rags into a cup for the youngest to drink. Survival isn't glamorous. Still, life goes on. You toast with a tin mug, sip carefully, and remind yourself that every gulp is a tiny victory. Sure, you risk a rumbling stomach or worse, but there's something defiantly cheerful about facing down another day, bucket in hand, thirst slaked, at least for now. Because in the endless gamble for survival, you'll always take your chances with a good glass of water and hope you're still smiling by bedtime. Religion is both comfort and obligation. Sunday service offers warmth, a sense of community, and maybe, just maybe, a hot meal. You pray for salvation, or at least for less rain this week. If you're poor in Victorian England, church isn't just for the devout, it's a lifeline, a place to find relief from the damp and the daily struggle. The church bells mark the start of every week, ringing through the fog and filth, reminding everyone that even if God has a soft spot for the rich, He keeps the doors open for the rest of us too. You might not have much, but you've got your faith and the faint hope that, today, the vicar will glance your way and slip an extra bread roll into your hand. For many, Sunday is the one day of the week when you can count on sitting somewhere warm that doesn't smell like old socks and cabbage stew. You dust off your best clothes, best meaning least threadbare, and march to church, kids in tow, boots shining with spit and determination. The pews are hard, the hymn book's battered, and the organ wheezes like an asthmatic cat, but it's all beautiful compared to the chaos back home. Inside, you're surrounded by neighbours and strangers, rich and poor, all squeezed together in uncomfortable proximity, singing hymns and listening to sermons about perseverance, virtue, and the rewards waiting in the next life. For the poor, that next life often sounds suspiciously like central heating, clean water, and shoes without holes. Still, the message brings comfort, or at least distraction. You find yourself humming along, eyes drifting shut, half listening as the vicar thunders on about charity and the evils of gin. Charity, of course, is a mixed blessing. There's dignity in receiving help, but also a certain sting. Charity isn't always kind, and the deserving poor is a moving target. You line up after service for the soup kitchen or the bread line, clutching your tin mug and hoping no one you know is watching. The wealthy parishioners make their rounds, dropping pennies into outstretched hands or pressing a package of food into your arms, always with that look that says, "I hope you're grateful." You are, even if it means swallowing a little pride along with the watery soup. But church isn't just about handouts. It's about community, the only place where you might find a shoulder to lean on, a friend to commiserate with, or even a bit of gossip that isn't about how many potatoes you managed to buy this week. Children play outside in their Sunday best, running wild in the graveyard while parents swap stories about rent, work, and the endless quest for a pair of dry socks. For a few hours, the burdens of the week lift, replaced by the shared hope that things might get better, or at least that someone will bring cake to next week's meeting. Religion offers a measure of routine in a world with very little predictability. Morning prayers, evening blessings, and the quiet ritual of lighting a candle for someone lost. You take comfort in the small certainties, the same psalms, the same faces, the same chance to sit quietly and remember that you're not alone, no matter how heavy your burdens feel. Of course, not everyone finds comfort in church. For some, it's just another obligation, a duty to be performed, or a box to tick for the landlord or the parish board. But even the skeptics admit, it's warmer inside than out. And sometimes, faith is just the act of showing up, week after week, hoping for a miracle, or at least a slightly longer sermon if it means more time off your feet. And so, each week, you answer the call of the church bells, seeking not just spiritual salvation, but a sense of belonging, a sliver of hope, and maybe a few extra spoonfuls of soup. You pray for the strength to carry on, for rain to let up, and for one more Sunday spent in the glow of something bigger than yourself. In Victorian England, that's more than most can ask for. You cling to tiny joys, a warm cup of tea, a neighbour's wild story, or a glimpse of the sun between factory shifts. Sometimes, joy is just finding an extra potato at the bottom of the sack. In a world where most things are hard, grim, and soggy, The pursuit of happiness becomes an art form, one practiced in quick, stolen moments and with the barest of resources. Take tea, for instance. More ceremony than beverage, sometimes more hope than flavour. The kettle is set on the stove as soon as there's a scrap of coal to spare, and everyone in the household lines up for their chance to sip from the same battered cup. It doesn't matter if the leaves have already been reused so many times they're practically transparent. The ritual is what counts. That first steaming mouthful feels like a hug from the inside, and for a few precious seconds, all is right with the world. Then there's gossip. The original Victorian entertainment. When every penny counts, and you can't afford theatre tickets, you make your own drama, usually in the street, at the market, or huddled around the communal wash basin. Did you hear about Mrs. Partridge's new lodger? Who claims he once danced for the prince? Or how the baker's apprentice mysteriously came into a full loaf of bread on Wednesday? Everyone listens, everyone adds a little, and stories grow taller than the smokestacks. Sometimes, a single tale, wild, hilarious, or just plain impossible, will circulate through the tenements for weeks, morphing with every retelling until it's practically legend. If you're very lucky, the sun will break through the endless grey clouds and send a patch of golden warmth straight through your window. For those few moments, people stop what they're doing and soak up the rays like lizards on a rock. You might see someone pause mid-scrub at the laundry line, face turned to the sky, eyes closed, just drinking in the light. Children dart into the street, trying to catch the sun before it disappears behind the next cloud. Adults gather at the stoop, half pretending to chat about the weather, half just grateful for the brief escape from the cold. Sometimes escapism takes a more creative form. A penny saved is a penny spent on a chapbook, maybe full of dreadful poetry or daring tales of highwaymen and haunted abbeys. The entire family might gather to listen as someone reads aloud, voices rising and falling as you're whisked away to places with green fields and happy endings. Or you might get swept up in a makeshift performance, neighbours acting out scenes from memory, children reciting half-remembered nursery rhymes, or an old uncle reciting a bawdy song from the old country, to the scandal and delight of all present. Nature, even the smallest bit, is a balm for the weary. If you're near a park, you treasure the few stolen minutes among grass and trees. If not, you make do with a potted geranium, a window box of half-dead herbs, or just watching a determined pigeon build its nest under the eaves. Even the sight of laundry flapping in the breeze becomes oddly beautiful when everything else is grey and drab. Of course, simple pleasures can be edible too. Finding an extra potato, a withered apple, or the last heel of cheese is cause for celebration. Sometimes even an impromptu feast. The family gathers, the meal is stretched, and for a little while, nobody's hungry, and everyone's spirits rise just enough to make room for laughter. At night, the real escapism begins. Families trade stories in the dark, weaving wild tales and whispered dreams. You talk about the future, of shops to own, ships to sail, or just the hope of a week with more sun than rain. The world may be bleak, but for those brief, stolen moments, it's softer, lighter, and, if you squint, almost lovely. Because in the end, it's these small pleasures, tea, gossip, sunlight, stories that make life bearable. They're the stitches that hold the fabric of the day together, proof that even in the grimmest times, people still find ways to smile, laugh, and dream. And that, in Victorian England, is worth more than gold. No matter the season, everything is slightly damp. Clothes, shoes, bread, dreams, damp. You make peace with it, or you try to. In the slums of Victorian England, dry is not a condition you expect. It's a rumour, a memory, a hope whispered by old-timers who claim there was once a dry week in the year 1847. The rest of the time you exist in varying stages of moist, clammy, and if you're lucky, merely spongy. The city's endless drizzle seeps through every crack, soaks every wall, and transforms every blanket into a contest between mildew and moths. You wake up in the morning, Peel yourself off your straw mattress and feel the unmistakable chill of moisture on your skin. The air is heavy, dense with fog, and the single window in your room is clouded with condensation. If you're clever, you save your driest shirt to sleep in, so it has a fighting chance to dry out overnight. The rest of your clothes are perpetually cold and clammy, no matter how close you hang them to the hearth. Laundry never truly dries. It just rotates between wet and slightly less wet, depending on the mood of the Thames. Shoes, if you have them, are always damp around the edges, and the familiar squelch of toes in soggy stockings is a sound you associate with every step, every season. Bread, that staple of Victorian life, absorbs the humidity, turning from tough to spongy to borderline, inedible in a matter of hours. Even dreams get damp. Plans are postponed because of rain, outings cancelled because the alley has turned into a bog, and nothing seems to escape the creeping, crawling embrace of moisture. Walls weep in silence. The plaster flakes away, patches of black mould bloom in corners, and the wallpaper bubbles and peels like a science experiment gone wrong. Your mother scrubs the walls, cursing both the weather and whoever invented the concept of affordable housing. You hang blankets over the worst patches, but the damp wins every time, seeping through to chill your bones while you sleep. You invent strategies to battle your ancient enemy. On good days, you position your shoes and socks close to the fire, risking a scorched heel for the fleeting joy of toasty toes. On bad days, you just surrender, pull on your least wet boots, and resign yourself to a day of squishing noises and chilly ankles. If someone brings home a rare dry coal, the whole family gathers around the hearth in a desperate bid to dry as many things as possible: clothes, rags, and spirits. Dampness, of course, isn't just uncomfortable, it's dangerous. Coughs linger, joints ache, and every sniffle feels like the opening act for something far worse. The doctor, if you can afford him, will tell you to keep warm and dry. You and your family laugh until you cough, because if there were prizes for most ironic medical advice, that would win every year. Children get creative, inventing new games like Find the Dry Spot or Guess What's Growing in the Corner. You make jokes about being part frog or suggest you're turning into a mushroom. You hang socks from strings crisscrossed overhead, transforming your living room into an obstacle course of dripping laundry. Sometimes the line snaps, and you get a surprise cold slap of sock to the face, a classic Victorian wake-up call. Still, you persevere. People find ways to cope: an extra layer of ragged blanket, a hot brick at the feet, or, on particularly miserable days, huddling together for warmth and collective grumbling. Community matters, and on the wettest days, neighbours open their doors, sharing stories and body heat as much as tea. In the end, you accept the damp as a fact of life, an eternal part of the Victorian bargain. You joke about it, complain about it, and secretly hope that maybe, just maybe, the next day will bring a patch of blue sky. Until then, you wring out your sleeves, shake the droplets from your hair, and step bravely into the world, slippery, shivering, but unbeaten by your oldest, soggiest foe. Doctors cost money. You don't have money. Home cures include onion poultices, mustard plasters, and denial. Miraculously, sometimes you survive anyway. Getting sick in Victorian England, especially when you're poor, is a bit like losing at a rigged game. Everyone's a contestant, the house always wins, and the prizes are cough syrup made from molasses and a rousing game of guess what's contagious. The moment you start sniffling, sneezing, or feeling a little warm, everyone in the family launches into full panic mode. After all, illness spreads faster than rumours in a workhouse. The first line of defence is denial. "It's just the weather," your mother says, as you huddle by the fire, shivering under every blanket in the house. "Bit of a draft," adds your father, with the confidence of someone who once walked to school barefoot in the snow and survived on gruel. But soon enough, reality sets in. The chills turn to fever, the cough deepens, and the only thing louder than your wheezing is your grandmother reciting every old wives' remedy she knows. This is where the fun really starts. Out come the onion poultices, mustard plasters, vinegar wraps, and the infamous goose grease. If you've never experienced the joy of having a hot onion mash strapped to your chest, count yourself lucky. It smells like a soup gone horribly wrong and stings like betrayal. Mustard plasters, meanwhile, are the Victorian equivalent of, if it burns, it's working. You're wrapped up in rags, swaddled like a baby, and subjected to home cures that are equal parts medieval and masochistic. If things get worse, someone might send for the apothecary, a man whose main qualification is the ability to mix herbs with mysterious powders and charge for it. He'll offer a tincture that tastes like rotten licorice, declare you well on the mend, and suggest you stay warm and eat more broth. The only problem is, the firewood is low, and broth is mostly wishful thinking flavoured with leftover bones. Actual doctors are reserved for emergencies or rich people. The poor might glimpse a physician on his rounds, top hat glinting and carriage wheels splashing mud on the pavement. But the idea of him stepping inside your flat is laughable. On rare occasions, charity hospitals offer free clinics, but you'll be waiting for hours in a crowd of coughing, shivering bodies, all of whom are equally unenthusiastic about your odds of survival. Still, you do what you can. Bed rest if you can claim a space, hot water if you can spare the coal. Someone might fetch a neighbour known for her herbal wisdom. Every street has one. She'll bring nettle tea, peppermint, and sometimes advice that sounds suspiciously like walk it off. If the illness lingers, everyone gets involved. Siblings fetch water, parents watch for signs of turning worse, and even the family cat offers the occasional half-hearted purr. Sickness changes the rhythm of life. Meals are skipped or turned into bland mush for the patient. Chores are reassigned, siblings grow resentful, and the entire household is wrapped in a fog of worry and impatience. Sometimes, sadly, there's nothing to do but wait, and pray that the fever breaks, the cough softens, or the rash fades. Sometimes it does. Other times, it doesn't, and you lose a cousin, a grandparent, or a neighbour whose absence echoes louder than the nightly cough. And yet, life goes on. When someone miraculously recovers, there's quiet celebration, a pot of real soup, a scrubbed bed, maybe even a borrowed orange from the market as a symbol of victory. You trade stories about your closest brushes with death, and the whole family jokes that you're tough as old boots now, even as you eye the next sneeze with suspicion. Because in Victorian poverty, illness is just another fact of life, relentless, inconvenient, and entirely democratic. But so is survival. You build up layers of immunity, resilience, and humour. You learn to make do, to muddle through, and to laugh about it later, if you can. And sometimes, just sometimes, you pull through with nothing but onion poultices, a dash of hope, and a refusal to give up, no doctor required. With no toys and nowhere to go, you make fun where you can. Skipping rope with old twine, playing tag through puddles, inventing games with pebbles and bits of string. It's not much, but it's yours. The back alleys of Victorian England aren't just corridors for trash and trouble, they're the playgrounds of the poor, bursting with the sound of bare feet, shrieking laughter, and the slap, slap, slap of a skipping rope made from whatever you found in the wash basket. The game selection is determined less by rules and more by what's lying around. An empty tin can, a broken broom handle, or a few scraps of discarded fabric can become props for the greatest entertainment east of the Thames. The streets might be narrow, muddy, and perfumed with the unique blend of horse, coal, and cabbage, but they're home turf for children with a talent for squeezing fun out of nothing. You learn early that you don't need a real ball when a balled-up rag will do, or that a single hoop prized above gold can entertain half the block for hours, provided no one squashes it in a brawl over whose turn is next. There's tag, of course, a game as timeless as dirt. Dodging puddles, dashing around barrels, and weaving between lines of drying laundry. You sprint until your lungs burn, sometimes risking a skinned knee on a cobblestone. Catch me if you can. Echoes up and down the block, sometimes followed by watch out for the cart or mind the cat. The cat, naturally, is the undefeated champion at avoiding capture. You invent obstacle courses out of whatever's handy. A pile of crates becomes a castle, a coal chute is a secret slide, and the rickety fence between alleys is a tightrope worthy of a circus act. If you're daring, you challenge each other to jump over the widest puddle or climb the highest stack of bins, collecting bruises and glory in equal measure. On rainy days, when even the bravest kids admit defeat, you duck into doorways and under stoops, making up rhymes, swapping ghost stories, or playing guessing games with pebbles. Which hand is it in? Hint: it's always the muddy one. The more creative invent their own board games, drawing grids in the dirt and moving stones, buttons, or old bones as pieces. The rules change every 5 minutes, but nobody minds. Arguing about rules is half the fun. Allies and rivalries are forged in these alleys. You form gangs with grandiose names, the Fearless Five, the Puddle Jumpers, the Alley Foxes, and swear solemn oaths to defend your patch of mud from the boys on the next street over. Epic battles are fought with handfuls of soft dirt or, in winter, with hard-packed snowballs that leave a mark for days. The only law is that if you get caught by a grown-up, everyone scatters, and whoever's slowest gets to explain to Mrs. Murphy why there's a chicken in her washtub again. Of course, not every moment is high adventure. Sometimes play is quiet, sitting on a doorstep stringing beads from clover flowers, or teaching a younger sibling how to whistle through a blade of grass. Sometimes it's watching the clouds drift between the chimneys, or listening to the distant sound of a hurdy-gurdy man on the main road. When the sun goes down, or when a parent's voice rings out above the din, in for tea now, you gather your treasures, pebbles, twine, the last crust of bread, and promise to meet again tomorrow. Same alley, same time, with the same motley crew. You head inside with dirty hands, muddy feet, and a grin that's almost too wide for your face. You may have nothing, but for a few stolen hours, you had the whole world, your world, made out of puddles, pebbles, and laughter that echoes long after the last game ends. Night doesn't bring rest. It brings new noises, aches, and the occasional cold draft across your face. You pull the covers up and hope tomorrow is better, or at least not wetter. For the poor in Victorian England, bedtime is a concept more than a comfort. There's no soft mattress, no fresh linens, no guarantee of peace. Your bed might be a straw-stuffed sack, a sagging pallet on the floor, or the simple patch of ground you staked out hours ago with your one and only blanket. If you're lucky, you've claimed the spot furthest from the drafty door or window, the kind of luck that often takes a diplomatic negotiation, quick feet, and a healthy disregard for sibling loyalty. As the last bit of daylight fades behind the chimney stacks, the house transforms. The air grows colder, the walls seem to press in, and a different sort of noise takes over. The daytime soundtrack of clanging pots and children's shouts is replaced by the nighttime chorus, distant bickering between neighbours, the soft patter of water dripping from a leaky roof, the sighs and snores of family members, and, inevitably, the scurrying of rats who have decided it's their shift on the night watch. You try to settle in, but there's always something. Someone hogs the blanket, someone else mumbles in their sleep, or kicks you every time they turn over. A baby cries 2 feet away, echoing off the thin walls and mixing with the sounds of London's midnight street life, a stray dog barking, a costermonger singing off-key, a cart rumbling past, its wheels clattering on the cobbles. Occasionally, a particularly enthusiastic dispute from the flat next door will provide the evening's entertainment, complete with banging on the wall as both sides vie for victory. It's cold, of course, always cold. Even in summer, the nights feel clammy and close. In winter, the frost creeps in and your breath hangs in the air above you, visible each time you sigh. You burrow deeper into the covers, trying not to think about the draft that snakes across your face or the damp that never quite leaves your bones. Some nights, the only source of warmth is the combined body heat of every relative and stray pet in the bed. Comfort is a group activity, whether you like it or not. Sleep, when it comes, is shallow and restless. Your dreams are filled with the worries of the day, the fear of illness, the hope for a bigger meal, the endless riddle of how to make do with less. You wake often, sometimes to scratch at the persistent itch of fleas, sometimes to roll away from a sibling's elbow, sometimes just because your mind won't let go of the ache in your belly or the dread of tomorrow's work. You listen to the city's breathing, its coughs, its bells, its endless movement, and you try to find comfort in the rhythm, as familiar as your own. Midnight brings new challenges. Someone needs the privy, and the debate begins. Who will brave the icy floor, the darkness, the very real possibility of stepping on something best left unidentified? Sometimes it's you tiptoeing through the gloom, clutching your blanket around your shoulders, praying you don't stub your toe or wake the rats, who are, frankly, over this nightly disturbance. And always there's the worry. Will the roof leak again if it rains? Will tomorrow bring work or hunger? Will you wake up at all, or will another cough, another fever make this your last uncomfortable night? But then, someone in the bed lets out a soft snore, or a sibling mumbles a sleepy joke, and for a brief moment, you remember that you're not alone. The misery is shared, but so is the hope. Eventually, sleep sneaks up, heavy and unkind, and you drift off, clutching your threadbare blanket, ready to face whatever tomorrow brings. Because in Victorian England, even the longest, noisiest, coldest night is survived 1 hour, 1 laugh, and 1 shiver at a time. Even in the darkest, dampest cellar, someone dreams of more. Maybe you'll become a famous singer, a sailor, or just the proud owner of 2 whole pairs of socks. Hope is stubborn, and it keeps you moving. For every family squeezed into a tenement or workhouse, hope is the invisible lodger, never quite seen, but always present, lurking in the back of every mind and every bedtime story. Maybe it's the daydream that plays while you sweep the steps or fold laundry, a future where you wake up warm and dry, where your stomach isn't already planning its next argument with your backbone, and where you can walk through life without worrying about holes in your shoes or rain in your bed. Children spin grand tales in the gutter and on the stoop, borrowing bravado from penny dreadfuls and street legends. One day, I'll be a famous actress, my face on every billboard. I'm going to America and come back with gold in my pockets and real bacon for breakfast. I'll own a shop, and everyone in the neighborhood will buy sweets from me, and nobody will ever go hungry. Sometimes, the dreams are as simple as having a room of your own, a new coat, or a meal that ends with dessert. Small things, but they shimmer just out of reach, lending meaning to the daily grind. Adults dare to hope too, though they're quieter about it. Over weak tea and thicker silence, parents speak of saving up enough for a better room, or finding steady work with honest wages. Maybe your mum dreams of a kitchen with a real oven instead of a makeshift hearth. Maybe your dad still nurses the notion of a plot of land in the country, chickens, potatoes, a bit of space to breathe, and no landlord knocking every week. The world, for all its greyness and grind, is laced with flashes of possibility. The market boy who runs errands for the grocer sometimes gets a day-old apple as a reward, a treat, yes, but also proof that fortunes can shift, if only a little. The factory girl who saves every spare farthing, imagining the day she can buy her little brother a proper pair of boots. The match girl who hums old music hall songs in the alleys and dreams, fiercely, of a stage brighter than any street lamp. Hope hides in small victories. A half-day off when the factory shuts down. The rare surprise of a school lesson, a borrowed book, or a letter from a cousin who made it big in Liverpool. A neighbour's story about someone who clawed their way out. He started with nothing. And now, look at him, running a shop and sending for his mum. Each tale is a spark, quickly seized and held close, even when the odds seem impossible. Of course, reality is never far behind. The road out of poverty is long, crooked, and covered in mud. Every step forward comes with setbacks, illness, lost wages, rent hikes, and the brutal math of too many mouths, not enough bread. But still, you tell yourself, maybe next week, maybe next year, You practice patience, resilience, and the gentle stubbornness that is the real inheritance of the Victorian poor. And hope is contagious. It's shared over fence posts, in whispered plans, and in the gentle squeeze of a hand before bed. Parents encourage their children to study their letters, to mind the teacher, because education is a narrow but sturdy ladder out of the cellar. Friends push each other to keep trying, keep hustling, keep believing that something better waits beyond the smog and the river. As the house settles into uneasy sleep and the city's noises fade to a dull hum, you stare at the ceiling and plot your escape. Maybe tomorrow you'll be one step closer to something brighter, something yours. Because hope, in all its stubborn glory, is the one thing you don't have to share, trade, or patch. It's yours. And it's what gets you up each morning, ready to try again. No matter how many times the world says not yet. The sun rises, the routine repeats. There's always another meal to chase, another job to try, another cough to ignore. And somehow, you make it through, one crumb, one joke, one damp blanket at a time. Waking up in Victorian poverty isn't a grand affair. It's more of a slow negotiation with your body, one stiff limb at a time, untangling yourself from the knot of family sharing a bed that's long since given up the pretense of comfort. The air is chilly, the mattress is damp, and your first conscious thought is usually, is it really morning already? You listen for the familiar sounds, a sibling coughing, the clatter of someone's shoes on the floorboards, the unmistakable gurgle of the kettle starting its daily struggle over the fire. These aren't just noises, they're reminders that life, somehow, keeps moving. There's no such thing as a lie-in. Morning is a clock that runs on necessity. If you're not up and about, you risk losing your share of the day's meagre bread or missing your turn at the communal wash basin, if there's water to spare. Your clothes, wrung out the night before, are somehow just as damp and chilly as when you took them off. Still, you put them on, layering as much as possible, hoping to trap the last remnants of body heat before you step out into the cold. Breakfast is an exercise in both patience and optimism. The kettle boils with a resigned sigh, and the tea is weak but hot. If you close your eyes, you can almost pretend it's rich and aromatic. A slice of bread, a spoonful of porridge, or maybe just a memory of last night's potato. Sometimes you find a surprise at the bottom of the sack, an overlooked crumb, a slightly less stale heel of bread, and it feels like a stroke of luck. Every meal is a small victory, and you savor it, because you know lunch and dinner might be even less certain. The chores begin before the first real yawn. Water needs fetching, coal needs scrounging, and siblings need herding. You pick up yesterday's routines as if you never put them down, moving through the cramped space in a practice dance that keeps elbows from colliding, mostly. Someone's always running late. Someone's always lost a sock. Someone's always arguing over who has to check the chamber pot this morning. You do your best to avoid extra work, but in a house where nothing is private and everyone's business is everyone's business, your efforts rarely go unnoticed. Then, it's off to work or school or wherever the day decides to send you. Some trudge to the factory, others to the docks, others still to the market in search of pennies and hope. If you're young, maybe you'll pick up a new job, carrying parcels, running errands, watching a neighbour's baby in exchange for a crust of bread. The lucky ones get lessons, their slate and chalk tucked under an arm, their heads filled with dreams of something more. The unlucky ones do whatever is needed, grateful for any work that keeps them out of the workhouse for another day. You share jokes in the cold, because laughter costs nothing and goes a long way toward warming frozen hands and hearts. News, gossip, and wild plans for the future are passed around like treasures, brightening even the dreariest chores. Every now and then, you pause to watch a ray of sun filter through the smog, or listen to a robin's song and wonder what it must be like to fly away. Yet no matter how hard, how tedious, or how hopeless it sometimes feels, you get through the day, one foot in front of the other, one errand at a time, one crumb of bread, and one snatch of laughter, repeated over and over. Because in Victorian poverty, Survival is its own small triumph, and every morning you wake up and do it all again. Not because you want to, but because you have to. And because, even in the greyest dawn, there's always the hope that tomorrow will be just a little bit brighter. Every family has that one pair of shoes, the communal battered boots passed down, borrowed, or occasionally abducted by neighbours. You wake up to find yours missing again, and prepare for another day of inventing reasons why barefoot is, technically, very fashionable in France. In the grand hierarchy of Victorian poverty, shoes are somewhere between priceless heirloom and community legend. Your family's boots, if you're lucky enough to own a pair, are like a sacred relic. Not because they're beautiful, or even because they fit, but because they exist at all. They've survived years of mud, market trips, and a series of feet that range in size from toddler to grown man with suspiciously pointy toes. They are patched, worn thin, and carry the unmistakable scent of too many seasons trudging through London's least picturesque puddles. The day begins with a shoe inspection. Where did you leave them last night? At the end of the bed, or near the door? Did you hide them under the mattress to keep them safe, only to forget and nearly crush them with your morning sprawl? Or, worse, did a sibling borrow them for a dawn errand, promising to bring them back in 5 minutes? Which, as any Victorian child knows, means when I remember or when you start to yell. Inevitably, shoes go missing. Sometimes they're genuinely lost in the chaos of a cramped flat, buried under laundry, accidentally kicked beneath the stove, or stolen by the family dog for a chew toy. Other times, it's sabotage. A cunning sibling, tired of cold feet, has borrowed them for the day, leaving you to improvise. There are even darker rumours. Perhaps Mrs. Brown from upstairs, who hasn't been seen in decent shoes for a month, slipped in last night and liberated your pair. In the slums, everyone keeps an eye on everyone else's footwear. The hunt begins. You crawl under beds, poke through piles of damp laundry, and interrogate your siblings like a detective with more suspicion than evidence. Accusations fly. Promises are made. If you find them, you can wear the left one tomorrow. And bargains are struck that would make a street market haggler blush. If you have an older brother or sister, they might admit, eventually, to borrowing them, but only after you've spent the morning blaming the rats. If, after all that, the shoes are truly gone, you face the day barefoot. Again. The streets are unforgiving, cobblestones sharp enough to leave lasting impressions, puddles of indeterminate depth and temperature, and the ever-present threat of stepping in something unmentionable. You learn to walk on the balls of your feet, dodging hazards and pretending you don't mind. Barefoot's all the rage in Paris, you announce to anyone who'll listen, and probably in London too. Next year, everyone will be doing it. If you say it with enough confidence, you might even start to believe it. Going without shoes is both a hardship and a weird badge of honor. You swap stories with your friends about the best tricks for avoiding cuts and blisters. You marvel at the calluses you're developing, tough as leather, almost as thick as the missing soles. You become an expert in reading the street, which puddles are safe, which alleyways to avoid, and how to hop from stone to stone like a nimble, if chilly, cat. Meanwhile, your parents are locked in their own shoe drama. They juggle whose work boots are needed most urgently, who can get by with stuffed newspaper in a hole, and whether today is the day they finally break down and try to patch the soles with leftover rags. The family shoe fund, kept in a jar on the mantel, grows at a glacial pace, always 1 penny short of a new pair, and occasionally raided for emergency bread or coal. Sometimes, miraculously, the shoes return. A neighbour's child mistakenly brings them back, or a sibling discovers them under the bed after all. There is joy, relief, and a new wave of negotiations about whose turn is next. The boots, battered but unbowed, go back to work, and so do you, feet slightly warmer, pride slightly restored, until the next morning, when the mystery of the missing shoes begins all over again. In Victorian England, nothing's certain except death, taxes, and the eternal search for shoes that aren't exactly yours, but will do for now. You finally manage to wash your one good shirt and hang it on the line with hope in your heart. 5 minutes later, it's either been stolen by someone even poorer, rained on by the eternal British drizzle, or enthusiastically redecorated by a passing pigeon. At this point, you start looking up at the sky with a quiet sense of betrayal. Laundry in Victorian poverty is less of a household chore and more of a full-contact sport. First comes the Herculean labour of washing, scrubbing with knuckles raw, beating fabric against rocks or a battered washboard, and wringing out every drop you can before your arms give out. You eye your meagre pile of clothes, trying to decide if this week is the week to risk washing your only shirt, or if it's better to wait until it can practically walk itself to the line. Once you commit, you brace yourself for the next ordeal, getting the clothes dry. The laundry line is a string, sometimes rope, sometimes whatever you can scavenge, stretched between tenement windows, across cramped courtyards, or tied up in the narrowest, gloomiest corner of the alley. Everyone in your building has staked a claim, and the result is a rainbow, well, mostly shades of grey and brown, of shirts, stockings and mystery rags flapping in the breeze, tangled together in a hopeful knot. The weather, of course, is never on your side. You step outside, squint at the sky, and try to judge if those clouds mean a passing sprinkle or a 3-day downpour. Usually it's both, sometimes at the same time. If the sun dares to appear, you seize your chance, racing to get everything on the line before your neighbour gets the prime spot closest to the bricks, which, in theory, radiate some warmth. You watch the clouds as you hang each item, sending silent prayers skyward, and swearing that next time you'll just wear your shirt inside out for another week. And then there's the theft. Clothes on the line are fair game to anyone who's desperate or just cheeky. You turn your back for a moment, run inside for a cup of tea, and come out to find that your one good pair of socks has vanished, replaced by a threadbare rag that you're certain isn't yours. You launch an investigation worthy of a Scotland Yard detective, grilling siblings, scanning neighbours' lines for familiar patterns, and occasionally confronting Mrs. Briggs next door, who always seems to have a suspiciously expanding collection of garments found blowing in the wind. If you get your laundry back, it's usually with new holes, new stains, and a slightly haunted look. But the real enemy? Pigeons. London's feathered hooligans perch above the lines, eyeing your fresh laundry with a level of malice usually reserved for tax collectors. You wave, shout, and throw stones, anything to deter them, but to no avail. The moment you look away, a pigeon unleashes its artistic vision on your shirt, transforming it into an abstract masterpiece of white splatters and indignation. The only thing worse than pigeon art is the local cat, who sometimes launches herself at the birds, only to bring the whole line down in a flurry of socks, feathers, and curses. Sometimes, after hours of battling weather, thieves, and wildlife, you manage to bring your laundry inside, mostly dry, mostly clean, and only slightly altered by the experience. You inspect each piece, grateful for what survived and resigned to the fact that, in Victorian England, perfection is a myth. You tell yourself that the new pigeon stain adds character, that the missing sock was a sacrifice to the gods of chance, and that, one day, you'll live somewhere with a roof, a stove, and a laundry line nobody else can reach. But for now, you soldier on, sharing jokes with neighbours about designer pigeon prints and trading laundry tips like family secrets. You hang your next load with a little less hope and a lot more string, because in the endless laundry line drama, optimism is always slightly damp, but never entirely gone. So tonight, as you drift off, clean, dry, and hopefully not sharing your pillow with anything that scurries, take a quiet moment to be thankful. Because you, my friend, have already outlived a Victorian workhouse shift simply by making it through this story. The Victorian poor survived on grit, humour, and a kind of stubborn optimism that could outlast any damp blanket or borrowed boot. Their days were full of noise, struggle, and moments of unexpected joy, a warm cup of tea, a joke told in the alley, the miracle of finding both shoes in the morning. They faced every cough, every empty plate, and every long night with a resilience that's easy to forget in our world of central heating and next-day delivery. Their lives were hard, but every laugh, every dream of a better tomorrow, was an act of gentle rebellion. Even when hope was as thin as their soup, it never completely ran out. So as you snuggle deeper into your own bed, free from coal dust, rent collectors, and the existential threat of a rogue rat, maybe whisper a thank you to those who came before you, for making it through winters with nothing but each other, bad bread, and stories to keep them warm, for reminding us that comfort isn't just about what you have, but who you share it with, and the hope you keep tucked away for another day. Because history, for all its misery and mud, is proof that people are stubborn, hopeful, and often a little bit ridiculous. And that's what makes it worth remembering, especially as you close your eyes and let sleep take you somewhere softer. Good night, and may your dreams be free of leaky roofs, missing socks, and midnight rent knocks. You've earned it.